When you sign up for naval service, there are certain realities you accept without question. Long deployments away from home, the constant motion of the sea beneath your feet, the endless cycle of watches, rotating every 4 to 6 hours, day after day, week after week. You learn to sleep in shifts. You learn to eat when you can. You learn that the ship never stops, which means you never truly stop either. What they don't tell you during training is how the watch can follow you, how it can creep into your off hours, into your rest periods, into the supposedly safe spaces where you're meant to recover and reset, how standing guard over nothing but dark water and empty horizon can somehow become more real than the moments when you're told to stand down. This is what happened to Alistair Rowe. And if you've ever spent time at sea, if you've ever stood a lonely watch in the deep hours of the night, maybe you'll understand how something like this could happen. Maybe you'll recognize the warning signs. Or maybe, like the rest of us aboard that vessel, you won't see it coming until it's too late. Our ship was 3 weeks into a routine transit. Nothing remarkable about the mission. We were moving cargo and personnel from one port to another, crossing a stretch of ocean so calm and featureless that every day felt like the one before it. The kind of voyage where the biggest challenge isn't storms or mechanical failures, but boredom. The kind where your mind starts playing tricks on you simply because there's nothing new to occupy it. Alistair had been assigned to the night watch rotation for years. It wasn't a punishment or a particularly difficult assignment. Some sailors actually prefer the night shift. It's quieter, fewer officers prowling around, fewer demands on your attention. You stand there, you scan the horizon, you monitor your section of the ship, and you hand over to the next watch when your time is up. Simple, routine, mind-numbing, maybe, but safe. He was good at it. Better than good, actually. Alistair never complained, never cut corners, never showed up late or asked to swap shifts. He was the kind of watchman every senior enlisted dreams about having on their crew. Reliable, silent, thorough. The type of sailor who could stand absolutely still for hours, eyes fixed on the darkness, never fidgeting, never drifting off, never even appearing bored. Some guys would lean against the railing to pass the time. Others would pace back and forth, counting steps to stay alert. Alistair just stood, perfectly upright, hands at his sides or clasped behind his back, scanning the water with mechanical precision. Left to right. Pause. Right to left. Pause. Repeat. Hour after hour. Night after night. Thomas Keir, the senior deckhand, had known Alistair for 2 deployments. They weren't exactly friends. Alistair wasn't the type to form close friendships. But Thomas respected him. You could set your watch by the man. Literally. He'd arrive at his post exactly on time, receive the handoff from the previous watch with a single nod, and remain in position until the relief showed up. Professional, distant, unshakable. That man's built like a lighthouse, Thomas once joked to another sailor. Just stands there and watches. Never burns out. But lighthouses, as it turns out, are stationary for a reason. They're built to stay in one place, to perform one function endlessly without deviation. And maybe that's not something a human being is meant to do. The first sign that something was off came on a Tuesday night. Or maybe it was Wednesday. Out here, the days blur together. William Crowe, the day lookout, had just finished his evening meal and was heading back to his bunk when he spotted Alistair standing in the corridor outside the berthing area. Just standing there, not moving, not doing anything, just present. "Hey, Rowe," William called out. "You good?" Alistair's head turned slowly, like a security camera adjusting its angle. His eyes focused on William, but there was a delay, a slight lag between seeing and acknowledging. "Fine," Alistair said. "Your watch over?" "Yes." "So, why aren't you sleeping?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm still listening," Alistair said. William frowned. The corridor was silent except for the constant low hum of the ship's engines, a sound so omnipresent that most sailors stopped noticing it after a few days. There was nothing to listen to. No alarms. No unusual sounds. Just a normal background noise of a vessel underway. Listening to what? William asked. Alistair didn't answer. He turned his gaze back toward the end of the corridor, toward the hatch that led to the outer deck. His posture was exactly the same as it would be during a watch. Feet shoulder-width apart, spine straight, hands loose but ready. Row. Go to sleep, Crow, Alistair said quietly. Someone needs to be rested. It was a strange thing to say. Strange enough that William stood there for another moment, trying to decide if he should press the issue or just let it go. But Alistair wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't breaking any rules. He was just standing. Weird, maybe, but not harmful. William shrugged and continued to his bunk. Sailors do odd things to cope with long deployments. Some guys worked out obsessively. Others wrote letters to girlfriends who stopped writing back months ago. If Alistair wanted to stand in a hallway instead of sleeping, that was his business. But the next night, Alistair was in the same spot. And the night after that, always in the corridor outside berthing. Always perfectly still. Always watching the hatch. Thomas noticed it too. He'd come off his own shift and found Alistair there at 0200, then again at 0430 when Thomas got up to use the head. Same position. Same blank, focused expression. Ro, have you slept at all? Thomas asked, keeping his voice low to avoid waking the other sailors. I rested, Alistair replied. That's not what I asked. I closed my eyes. For how long? Alistair didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on a hatch. Thomas felt a prickle of unease. He'd seen exhaustion before. Seen guys push themselves too hard, stay awake too long, start making stupid mistakes. But this wasn't that. Alistair didn't look tired. He looked focused. Intensely, unnaturally focused. Listen, brother, Thomas said carefully. You need actual sleep. Not just closing your eyes. Actual rack time. The ship's not going to fall apart if you're not standing guard every second. I know, Alistair said, but he didn't move. So go lie down. I can't. Why not? Another long pause. When Alistair finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost confused. Because the watch isn't over. Your shift ended 6 hours ago. I know. Jenkins is on watch now. I know. So the watch is covered. Alistair's jaw tightened. His hands clenched briefly, then relaxed. It's not the same, he said. Thomas waited for elaboration, but none came. Alistair just kept staring at that hatch, his eyes tracking something Thomas couldn't see. Over the next few days, the situation escalated. Alistair stopped going to the mess deck for meals. When Thomas or other crew members brought him food, he'd eat mechanically, barely tasting it, his attention always divided. He'd take a bite, chew, swallow, and immediately return his gaze to whatever section of the ship he'd designated as his responsibility. He was found standing on deck at all hours. Not just during his assigned watch, but during everyone's watch. Sailors would come topside for their shift and find Alistair already there, positioned in a shadowy corner of the deck, silent and motionless. When they asked what he was doing, he'd respond with something vague. Keeping an eye out. Making sure. Just checking. William started feeling uncomfortable whenever he had the day watch. He'd scan the deck, do his job, and inevitably his eyes would drift to wherever Alistair was standing. And Alistair was always looking back, not staring directly, just aware, always aware. It felt like being watched by something that never blinked, never wavered, never stopped paying attention. Does he even sleep? William asked Thomas one afternoon. Not that I've seen, Thomas admitted. That's not normal. I know. Someone should talk to him. Or talk to the captain. Thomas grimaced. Captain Moore was old school. The kind of officer who believed that mental toughness meant pushing through discomfort, that asking for help was a sign of weakness. If they brought Alistair's behavior to his attention, Moore would likely just tell Alistair to get over it and go to bed. And if Alistair refused, there would be consequences. Official consequences. The kind that followed a sailor for the rest of his career. "Let me try talking to him again," Thomas said. "If that doesn't work, we'll escalate." But talking didn't help. Every attempt to convince Alistair to rest, to take a break, to acknowledge that something was wrong was met with calm, polite resistance. "I appreciate your concern," Alistair would say. "But I'm fine. You're not sleeping. I'm resting. You're not eating properly. I'm eating enough. You're standing watch when you're not even on duty. Someone needs to watch. We have assigned personnel for that." "I know. So why? Because what if they miss something?" Alistair's voice rose slightly, the first sign of emotion anyone had seen from him in days. "What if something happens and no one's paying attention? What if there's a gap, just a few seconds, and that's all it takes?" Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He recognized that tone, that fear. It was the voice of someone who'd seen something go wrong, who'd witnessed what happens when vigilance fails, even for an instant. "Alistair," Thomas said gently, "what happened? Back before this deployment. What happened that's got you so wound up?" For a moment, Alistair's expression flickered. Something raw and painful crossed his face, there and gone in a heartbeat. "A man went overboard," Alistair said quietly. "During a storm. 4 years ago. I was on watch. I didn't see him go over. Didn't hear him. Didn't know until the next shift found his station empty. That wasn't your fault. Storms are chaotic. Visibilities. He was my responsibility," Alistair interrupted. "I was watching. I was supposed to be watching. And I failed. They never blamed you for that. I blamed me." Thomas didn't know what to say to that. How do you argue with someone's guilt? How do you convince them that they're not responsible for every possible thing that could go wrong? "So that's why you won't stop," Thomas said. "You think if you stop watching, someone else will disappear." Alistair met his eyes. There was something desperate in his gaze, something pleading. "Wouldn't you," he asked, "if you knew what could happen? If you'd seen it? Wouldn't you do everything in your power to make sure it never happened again?" Thomas wanted to say no, wanted to explain that this wasn't sustainable, that you can't prevent every tragedy, that hypervigilance would destroy him faster than any accident. But looking at Alistair's face, at the conviction burning behind those tired eyes, he knew words wouldn't help. This wasn't about logic anymore. This was about something deeper, something that had taken root in Alistair's mind and was growing, spreading, consuming everything else. The watch had stopped being a duty. It had become an identity, a purpose, a prison, and Alistair had locked himself inside. By the third week, everyone on the ship knew something was wrong with Alistair Rowe. The whispers started in the mess deck, spread through the berthing areas, and eventually reached the ears of the officers. But knowing something was wrong and doing something about it were two very different things. Captain Edwin Moore was a man who believed in the old ways. 28 years of naval service had taught him that sailors were resilient, that they could endure almost anything if you gave them purpose and kept them busy. Mental health concerns were something he acknowledged in theory, but rarely confronted in practice. In his experience, most psychological issues resolved themselves once a man got back on dry land, saw his family, had a few drinks, and remembered what he was working for. So when Thomas Keir finally approached him about Alistair's deteriorating condition, Moore's initial response was predictably dismissive. "Is he performing his duties?" Moore asked, not looking up from a navigation chart spread across his desk. "Yes, sir," Thomas admitted. "When he's on watch, he's perfect, actually. More alert than anyone else. Never misses anything." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem is he's also on watch when he's not on watch, sir. He doesn't sleep, barely eats, just stands in various parts of the ship, watching. All the time. It's been over a week since anyone's seen him properly rest." Moore finally looked up. His expression was unreadable, weathered face giving nothing away. "Has he caused any disruptions? Interfered with other sailors' duties? Failed to follow orders?" "Not exactly, sir. But not exactly means no, Keir. More leaned back in his chair. Look, I understand Roe's behavior is unusual, but we're 3 days from port. Once we make land, he'll have leave time. He can see a medical professional if he wants to. Until then, unless he becomes a danger to himself or others, we maintain course and let the man do his job. Thomas felt frustration building in his chest. Sir, with respect, I don't think this can wait 3 more days. The man is falling apart. He's just doing it very quietly. Then keep an eye on him, Morse said, returning his attention to the charts. Make sure he's not neglecting basic health and safety. But I will not remove a competent watchman from duty based on the fact that he takes his job seriously. Dismissed. Thomas left the captain's quarters feeling hollow. He'd done what he could through official channels. Now it was up to the crew to handle this themselves, to keep Alistair from completely losing himself before they reached port. But Alistair was already lost. He just hadn't realized it yet. That night, William Crowe had the evening watch, 2000 to midnight. He arrived at his station a few minutes early, as was his habit, and found Alistair already there. This in itself wasn't unusual anymore. What was unusual was Alistair's position. He was standing at the very edge of the deck, right up against the railing, leaning forward slightly. His hands gripped the metal bar with white-knuckled intensity, and his eyes were locked on the dark water below. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, making the ocean an impenetrable black void. Nothing to see, nothing to watch, just darkness. Roe, William called out softly, not wanting to startle him. Alistair didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that he'd heard. William approached carefully, the way you might approach a spooked animal. When he got close enough to see Alistair's face in the dim deck lights, what he saw made his blood run cold. Alistair's eyes were open, unblinking, staring down into the water with such intensity that it looked painful. His lips were moving, barely perceptible, forming words that William couldn't quite hear over the sound of the waves against the hull. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He was counting something in the water, or counting time, or counting something else entirely. Alistair, William said, louder this time. You need to step back from the railing. 14, 15, 16. Roe, can you hear me? 19, 20. William reached out and touched Alistair's shoulder. The reaction was immediate and violent. Alistair spun around, his hand shooting up to grab William's wrist with crushing force. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and for a moment William saw something in them that terrified him. Not anger, not aggression, but pure, undiluted fear. Don't, Alistair hissed. Don't make me lose count. Count of what? The seconds, the gaps, the moments when no one's watching. Alistair's grip loosened slightly, but his hand was shaking. Do you know how many there are? How many moments every day when we're not paying attention? When we look away for just a second, just 1 second, and that's when it happens. When what happens? When they disappear. Alistair's voice dropped to a whisper. When the sea takes them. It's always watching, Crow. Always waiting. And if we're not watching back, if we let our guard down for even a moment. He trailed off, his eyes drifting back to the water. William carefully extracted his wrist from Alistair's grip. His mind was racing. This wasn't just exhaustion or stress. This was something else. Something deeper and more concerning. Alistair, he said gently, the sea doesn't think. It doesn't plan. It doesn't wait for us to stop watching. It's just water. You're wrong. Alistair turned back to the railing. It knows. I've seen it. For years ago, during the storm, the sea knew exactly when I wasn't looking. It knew the precise moment to take him. And it will know again. That's why I can't stop. That's why someone always has to be watching. William felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He wanted to argue, to point out how irrational that sounded, but something in Alistair's conviction made the words die in his throat. This wasn't a man who could be reasoned with anymore. This was a man who had constructed an entire reality around his guilt and his fear, and he was living in it completely. I'm on watch now, William said. You can go rest. I'll keep watching. You'll get tired. You'll blink. You'll look away. Then come back in 4 hours when my watch ends. And what about the gap between when you leave and the next watch arrives? What about those minutes when the deck is empty? The deck is never empty. Someone's always. But what if they're late? Alistair's voice was rising again, taking on a desperate edge. What if they stop to use the head, or get distracted, or take an extra minute to finish their coffee? What if there's a gap, just 5 minutes of unwatched water, and that's all it takes? William didn't have an answer to that, because in Alistair's mind, in the logic of his unraveling worldview, it made perfect sense. If you believed that constant vigilance was the only thing preventing disaster, then any break in that vigilance became a catastrophic risk. I'm going to get Thomas, William said finally. You stay here. Don't do anything. Just stay here. He turned and hurried toward the interior of the ship, leaving Alistair alone at the railing. As he walked away, he heard that quiet counting resume. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thomas arrived within minutes, along with 2 other senior enlisted sailors. They found Alistair exactly where William had left him, still counting, still staring into the darkness. Alistair, Thomas said firmly. Look at me. Alistair's head turned slowly. His face was gaunt, cheeks hollow, eyes sunken. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. We're taking you to medical, Thomas continued. No arguments. No resistance. You're going to see the corpsman get checked out and get some actual sleep. That's an order. I can't, Alistair said simply. It's not optional. You don't understand. If I leave, if I stop, something will happen. I know it will. I can feel it. Nothing is going to happen. You can't promise that. Alistair's voice cracked. Nobody can promise that. That's the whole point. We can't know. We can't predict. All we can do is watch. All we can do is be ready. And if we stop being ready, even for a moment, one of the other sailors, a burly machinist's mate named Rodriguez, stepped forward. Brother, you're not making sense. You need help. I need to watch. You need to sleep. Sleep is a gap. Sleep is when it happens. Thomas exchanged glances with the others. This was worse than he'd thought. Alistair wasn't just exhausted. He wasn't just stressed. He was locked in some kind of psychological feedback loop, and every hour that passed made it tighter. Okay, Thomas said, changing tactics. Okay, you need to watch. Fine, but you can watch from medical. The corpsman's office has a porthole. You can see the water from there. You can keep watching while they check you out. How's that? Alistair considered this, his brow furrowing. The logic seemed to be getting through, finding some pathway in his fractured thinking. I can watch from there? He asked. Yes, you can watch the whole time. And you'll make sure someone's out here? Someone's always out here. I promise. Someone will always be on watch. It was a lie, or at least a misleading truth. The watch rotations would continue as normal, with their normal gaps and transition periods. But if it got Alistair to medical, Thomas was willing to say whatever was necessary. Alistair nodded slowly. Okay, but I need to do one more check first. One more scan of the perimeter. Make it quick. Alistair turned and began walking along the deck, his eyes sweeping the darkness beyond the ship. He moved with eerie precision, like a machine executing a programmed routine. Left to right. Pause. Right to left. Pause. His head would tilt slightly at each pause, as if he was listening for something beneath the sound of the waves. The others watched in uncomfortable silence. There was something deeply unsettling about seeing a grown man, a trained sailor, reduced to this. It was like watching someone slowly disappear, not physically, but mentally, their personality eroding away until only one obsessive drive remained. When Alistair finished his circuit of the deck, he returned to the group. Okay, I'll go to medical, but someone needs to be here. You promised. Williams is taking over watch in 10 minutes, Thomas said, gesturing to another sailor who had just arrived. "You can hand off to him." Alistair approached Williams, a young seaman who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation. Alistair studied his face for a long moment, as if assessing his worthiness. "You understand the responsibility?" Alistair asked. Yes," William stammered. "You'll watch the water? That's the job, yeah." "Not just watch. Really watch. Pay attention. Don't get distracted. Don't look away. Not even for a second. I'll do my best. Your best has to be perfect." Alistair grabbed William's shoulders, his grip tight enough to make the younger man wince. "Do you understand? It has to be perfect. Because if it's not, if you miss something, if you let there be a gap—" "Row, let him go," Thomas interjected, pulling Alistair's hand away. "You've made your point. Williams knows what to do. Now come on. Medical. Now." Reluctantly, Alistair allowed himself to be led away from the deck. But every few steps, he would glance back over his shoulder, his eyes seeking the railing, the dark water beyond, the endless horizon that had somehow become both his duty and his tormentor. As they descended into the interior of the ship, the artificial lights harsh after the darkness of the deck, Thomas noticed something that made his stomach clench. Alistair's lips were still moving, still forming those silent counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Even away from his post, even surrounded by steel walls and closed hatches, Alistair was still keeping watch, still counting the seconds, still convinced that his vigilance was the only thing standing between the ship and catastrophe. And Thomas realized with growing horror that medical wasn't going to fix this. Sleep medication wasn't going to fix this. Even getting to port and seeing a specialist might not fix this. Because Alistair Rowe hadn't just taken on the responsibility of the watch. He had become the watch. And Thomas had no idea how to separate the man from the duty that was consuming him. The corpsman's office was small and clinical, smelling of antiseptic and coffee. True to Thomas's word, there was a porthole, though it looked out on the wrong side of the ship, showing only more darkness and the occasional flash of white foam where the bow cut through the water. Alistair positioned himself at the porthole immediately, his hands pressed against the cool glass, his breath fogging the surface. The corpsman, a weary-looking petty officer named Chun, had been briefed on the situation. He approached Alistair carefully, as if dealing with someone who might bolt at any moment. "Petty Officer Rowe," Chun said professionally, "I need to check your vitals. Blood pressure, heart rate, basic physical assessment. You can stay by the window. I'll work around you." Alistair nodded without taking his eyes off the water. "Make it quick." Chun worked efficiently, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around Alistair's arm, checking his pulse, shining a light in his eyes. His expression grew increasingly concerned as the examination progressed. "When's the last time you slept?" Chun asked. "I rested yesterday." "That's not what I asked. When did you last sleep? Actual, sustained sleep?" Alistair's jaw tightened. "I don't remember. Best guess. A week. Maybe more." Chin's eyebrows rose. "A week? Are you sure? Time is difficult to track." "I bet it is." Chin made notes on his clipboard. "Your blood pressure is elevated. Heart rate is high. You're showing signs of severe sleep deprivation. Hallucinations? Paranoia? Hearing things that aren't there." "I'm not hallucinating." "That's what everyone who's hallucinating says." "I'm not." Alistair stopped, his attention suddenly fixed on something beyond the porthole. His entire body went rigid. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Chin moved to look out the window. There was nothing there, just dark water and darkness. There, in the water, something pale, moving just below the surface. Chin looked again. Still nothing. "Bro, there's nothing out there." "There is. I saw it. About 20 meters out, moving parallel to the ship. We need to report it." "We need to." "Alistair." Thomas stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me. There's nothing out there. You're exhausted. Your mind is playing tricks on you. I know what I saw. You're seeing things because you haven't slept in over a week. That's not a failure. That's just biology. Your brain is shutting down whether you want it to or not. Alistair pulled away from the porthole, turning to face Thomas with an expression of utter desperation. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. I can't stop. If I stop, if I sleep, if I let my guard down, something terrible will happen. I know it will. I can feel it in my bones. The sea is waiting. It's always waiting. And the moment I close my eyes, the moment I give it an opening, it will take someone. Maybe you, maybe Crow, maybe Williams. Someone will disappear, and it will be my fault because I wasn't watching. Thomas felt a lump forming in his throat. This wasn't just guilt anymore. This was a complete break from reality, a descent into paranoia so profound that Alistair genuinely believed his consciousness was the only thing protecting the entire crew. That's not how the world works, Thomas said gently. How do you know? Have you tested it? Have you deliberately stopped watching to see what happens? No, because you're afraid too. Everyone is. That's why we have watches in the first place. Because we know something bad can happen when no one's paying attention. It was a twisted logic, but there was a kernel of truth in it that made the argument impossible to fully dismiss. Watches existed for a reason. Vigilance mattered. But Alistair had taken that principle to an insane extreme, expanding it beyond any reasonable boundary. Chin pulled Thomas aside, speaking in a low voice. I can give him a sedative, strong enough to knock him out for 8 to 10 hours. He needs sleep, and he's not going to get it voluntarily. Thomas hesitated. Will that be safe, given his mental state? Safer than letting him continue like this. Another few days without sleep, and we're looking at complete psychological collapse. Possibly dangerous behavior. He's already seeing things that aren't there. Thomas looked back at Alistair, who had returned to the porthole, his forehead pressed against the glass, his lips moving in that endless count. Do it, Thomas said, but do it carefully. Chun prepared the injection while Thomas explained what was about to happen. Alistair, the corpsman is going to give you something to help you rest. I don't need help resting. Yes, you do. And it's not optional. This is for your own health. Alistair tried to pull away when Chun approached with the needle, but Thomas and Rodriguez held him steady. The injection was quick, professional. Alistair's eyes widened in panic as he felt the medication entering his system. No, he said. No, you can't. I need to watch. I need to. Someone else is watching, Thomas said firmly. Williams is on deck. The watch is covered. But the gaps, the transitions. Who's watching during the transitions? Everyone. We're all watching. The whole crew. You're not alone in this. You never were. Alistair's legs began to buckle as the sedative took effect. Thomas and Rodriguez eased him onto the medical cot. His eyes were fighting to stay open, panic written across his face. Don't let there be gaps, Alistair mumbled, his words slurring. Promise me. Don't let there be gaps. I promise, Thomas lied. The sea is waiting. Always waiting. Someone has to. His eyes finally closed. His breathing deepened, becoming slow and regular. For the first time in over a week, Alistair Rowe was truly unconscious. Thomas stood over him, watching the rapid eye movement beneath his eyelids, the occasional twitch of his hands. Even in sleep, Alistair looked troubled, as if some part of him was still trying to maintain the watch, still counting seconds, still scanning for dangers that existed only in his fractured mind. How long will he be out? Thomas asked. 8 hours minimum, Chin replied. Maybe 10 if his body really needs it. When he wakes up, we'll reassess. Maybe by then we'll be close enough to port that we can get him to a real medical facility. And if he wakes up and tries to go right back to watching, Chin didn't have an answer to that. They left Alistair in the medical bay, posting a sailor outside to keep an eye on him. Thomas returned to his quarters, exhausted but unable to sleep. He kept thinking about Alistair's face, that look of absolute conviction that his watching mattered, that it was the only thing preventing disaster. And a small, irrational part of Thomas's mind whispered, what if he's right? He pushed the thought away. Of course, Alistair wasn't right. Of course, one man's vigilance didn't determine whether tragedy struck. That was magical thinking, the kind of superstition that had no place in the modern Navy. But as Thomas lay in his bunk, listening to the familiar sounds of the ship around him, he couldn't quite shake the unease. Couldn't quite stop himself from wondering what would happen during those 8 to 10 hours while Alistair slept. Nothing, obviously. Nothing would happen, but he stayed awake anyway, just to be sure. Alistair woke screaming. Not the sharp, sudden scream of someone startled from a nightmare, but a prolonged, guttural sound of pure animal terror. The kind of scream that comes from somewhere deep and primal, from a place where language hasn't yet formed, where there's only fear and the need to warn others of danger. The sailor posted outside medical burst through the door to find Alistair bolt upright on the cot, his eyes wild, his hands clutching at his chest, as if trying to physically hold his heart inside his ribcage. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool air of the medical bay. How long? Alistair gasped. How long was I out? The sailor checked his watch. About 9 hours. It's 0600. You. 9 hours? Alistair's face went pale. 9 hours? Oh God. Oh God, no. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate, still weak from the sedative. He fell, caught himself on the edge of the cot, tried again. Sir, you need to stay down. The corpsman said. I don't care what the corpsman said. Alistair was on his feet now, swaying but upright. 9 hours. That's 540 minutes. 32,400 seconds. Do you know how many gaps that is? How many moments when something could have? He pushed past the sailor and stumbled into the corridor. His body was weak, uncoordinated, but his mind was racing with desperate energy. He had to get to the deck, had to check, had to see if everyone was still there, still accounted for, still safe. The sailor followed him, calling out for help. Within minutes, Thomas and Chun arrived, finding Alistair halfway up the stairs to the main deck, pulling himself up the railing one step at a time. Row stop, Thomas ordered. You're in no condition to... Did anyone go overboard? Alistair interrupted, not looking back. While I was asleep, did anyone disappear? No, everyone's accounted for. You're sure? I'm sure. You checked? You personally verified that every single person on this ship is still here. Thomas hesitated. He hadn't actually done a full muster. Why would he? This wasn't a combat situation. People were where they were supposed to be. That moment of hesitation was all Alistair needed to see. He turned, and the look on his face was one of vindication mixed with horror. You didn't check, Alistair said. You don't actually know. You're just assuming. That's what everyone does. They assume. And that's when it happens. Alistair, listen to yourself. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than any of you. Alistair continued his climb. You're all so comfortable, so confident that everything will be fine. But fine is just the space between disasters. Fine is just the gap when we're not paying attention. And I was asleep. I was asleep for 9 hours. Anything could have happened. He reached the top of the stairs and burst out onto the deck. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale orange. The sea was calm, almost glassy. A beautiful morning by any measure. Alistair didn't see the beauty. He saw threat. He saw the vast expanse of water that could swallow a man whole and leave no trace. He saw the endless horizon where someone could slip away unnoticed, unmourned, simply erased from existence by a moment of inattention. He ran to the railing, his eyes scanning the water frantically. Looking for what, Thomas couldn't say. Bodies? Evidence of struggle? Or just confirmation that his worst fears hadn't manifested while he slept? The morning watch personnel stared at him with a mixture of concern and discomfort. Word had spread through the ship about Alistair's condition. Everyone knew he'd been sedated, that he'd finally gotten some rest. Some had hoped that sleep would reset him, would bring him back to something resembling normal. But looking at him now, at the manic energy driving his exhausted body, it was clear that sleep had done nothing except give his anxiety 9 hours to build pressure with no release. "Where's Williams?" Alistair demanded, turning to face the watchstanders. "The sailor who took over for me. Where is he?" "In a mess, probably," one of them answered. "His watch ended at 0400. Get him. Get him now. I need to know if he saw anything. If anything happened while I was." He couldn't bring himself to say the word asleep, as if speaking it would make it more real, more shameful. Thomas climbed onto the deck, Chun close behind. They approached Alistair slowly, like handlers approaching a spooked horse. "Alistair," Thomas said softly. "Nothing happened. The ship is fine. The crew is fine. You being asleep for 9 hours didn't cause any catastrophes." "You can't know that," Alistair shot back. "You can't possibly know all the small things that might have gone wrong. Equipment failures, near misses, close calls that no one reported because they seemed insignificant. That's how it starts. Small gaps, small failures. And they compound, they build, until suddenly something major happens and everyone asks, how do we miss the warning signs? This is the warning sign. This moment right now. The fact that I wasn't watching." Chun stepped forward, his medical bag in hand. "Petty Officer Rowe, I need you to come back to medical. Your heart rate is dangerously elevated. You're at risk of cardiac arrest if you don't calm down." "I'll calm down when I know everyone's safe." "Everyone is safe." "Prove it." There was a long silence. "How do you prove a negative? How do you demonstrate that nothing bad has happened when the person you're trying to convince believes that bad things happen in the spaces between observation, in the gaps of attention that can't be retroactively examined?" Captain Moore appeared on deck, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at Alistair, shaking, sweating, eyes red-rimmed and desperate, and his expression hardened. "Petty Officer Rowe," Moore said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "You are hereby relieved of duty pending medical evaluation. Return to medical immediately." That's a direct order. "Sir, with respect, I can't do that. It's not a request." "I understand, sir. But if I leave this deck, if I stop watching, something will happen. I know it will. I can feel it. The sea has been waiting for me to let my guard down, and I gave it 9 hours. 9 hours. I can't give it any more." Moore's jaw tightened. In his decades of service, he dealt with plenty of difficult sailors. Drunks, fighters, malcontents, malingerers. But this was different. This was a good sailor, a reliable sailor, who had somehow broken in a way that Moore didn't have protocols for. "Here," Moore said, not taking his eyes off Alistair. "Is it true that Petty Officer Rowe hasn't slept in over a week?" "Yes, sir. Not until last night. And that was only because we sedated him. And he's been standing unofficial watches during off hours." "Yes, sir. For how long?" "At least 10 days. Maybe longer." Moore processed this information. He could see the trajectory clearly now. A man pushing himself beyond reasonable limits, driven by guilt or fear or some combination of both. A man who had crossed the line from dedicated to unstable. "Rowe," Moore said, his tone slightly softer, "I understand you feel responsible. I understand you're trying to prevent another accident. But this behavior is not sustainable. You're destroying yourself." "Better me than someone else," Alistair replied. "Better I break than someone dies because I wasn't paying attention. No one is going to die because you take a break. You can't promise that." "You're right. I can't. No one can promise absolute safety. That's not how the world works. We mitigate risks. We follow procedures. We do our best. But we cannot prevent every possible accident through sheer force of will. Then we're not trying hard enough." Moore's patience was wearing thin. That's not a rational position. I don't care about rational. Alistair's voice rose, echoing across the deck. I care about results. I care about making sure that when this ship reaches port, every single person who started this voyage is still aboard. And the only way to ensure that is constant vigilance. Unbroken, uncompromising, every second of every day. That's impossible. Then we're doomed. The bleakness of that statement hung in the air. Several sailors had gathered now, drawn by the confrontation. They watched in uncomfortable silence as one of their own publicly unraveled. Chin approached with a syringe, but Moore held up a hand, stopping him. Sedating Alistair again would only postpone the problem. When he woke up, he'd be even more convinced that his absence had created dangerous gaps. The cycle would continue. All right, Moore said finally. Here's what's going to happen. You want to watch? Fine, watch. But you're going to do it from medical where the corpsman can monitor your vitals. And you're going to eat regular meals. And if at any point Shin determines that you're a danger to yourself, we will restrain you. Are those terms acceptable? Alistair considered this. It wasn't what he wanted. Medical didn't have the same visibility as the deck, but it was better than being forcibly sedated again. The porthole, he said. The one in medical. It needs to face the correct direction. I need to see the main deck area. We can't move the porthole. Then set up a camera feed. Something I can monitor. Moore looked at Thomas, who shrugged. It was an unusual request, but not impossible. I'll see what we can arrange, Moore said. Now come with us. Voluntarily. No struggle. Alistair nodded slowly and allowed himself to be led back toward medical. But every few steps, he would pause and look back at the water, his eyes scanning, searching, as if expecting to see evidence of his failure manifesting in the waves. The improvised camera setup was crude but functional. One of the ship's technicians rigged a closed-circuit feed from a deck-mounted security camera to a small monitor in medical. It showed a grainy black-and-white view of the main deck area, refreshing every 2 seconds. Alistair sat in front of this monitor like it was a religious altar. His eyes never left the screen. He barely blinked. Meals were brought to him, and he would eat mechanically, his gaze never wavering from the flickering images. Chun monitored him constantly. Heart rate still elevated but stable. Blood pressure high, but not critical. The man was running on fumes, but he was running. How long can he keep this up? Chun asked Thomas during one of his visits. I don't know. Days, maybe. People have survived on less sleep for longer periods during combat situations. This isn't combat. Try telling him that. Days blurred together. The ship drew closer to port. Alistair remained in medical, watching his monitor, counting gaps in the camera's refresh rate, calculating blind spots in the coverage. He filled notebooks with observations, timing patterns, noting when different sailors appeared and disappeared from frame. William Crowe visited once. He stood in the doorway, unsure what to say to the man who had become a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when duty consumes identity. Hey, Roe, William said quietly. How you holding up? Alistair didn't look away from the screen. Did you maintain proper watch protocol during your last shift? Yes. I did everything by the book. No gaps? No moments when you were distracted? I was focused the whole time. That's good. That's important. Alistair's voice was flat, mechanical. We can't afford gaps. William left feeling worse than when he'd arrived. That wasn't Alistair anymore. That was something wearing Alistair's face, operating his body, but the person inside had been replaced by an algorithm. Watch, observe, calculate risk, watch again. On the final night, before reaching port, Thomas sat with Alistair in medical. The monitor showed the night watch crew making their rounds, small figures moving across the grainy screen. Tomorrow we dock, Thomas said. You'll be able to leave the ship. Get proper medical help. The ship doesn't stop being a ship when it's docked, Alistair replied. People still need to watch it. Make sure nothing happens to it. That won't be your responsibility anymore. It's always been my responsibility. Since the moment I took the oath. Since the moment I put on this uniform. That's not what the oath means. Then what does it mean? Thomas didn't have a good answer. How do you explain to someone that duty has boundaries, that responsibility can be delegated, that one person cannot and should not carry the weight of protecting everyone from everything? It means you do your job to the best of your ability, Thomas said finally, and then you trust others to do the same. It means you're part of a team, not a lone guardian standing against chaos. Teams fail. People fail. I failed once. I can't fail again. You didn't fail. The sea took someone during a storm. That's not failure. That's tragedy. There's a difference. Not to me. The monitor flickered. Alistair tensed, his hand reaching toward the screen as if he could somehow touch the deck through the glass, could physically verify that everything was still in place. I'm tired, Alistair said suddenly, his voice small and lost. I'm so tired, Thomas. But I can't stop. Because if I stop, if I close my eyes, I see him. The man who went overboard. I see him sinking into the dark water, looking up, wondering why no one saw him fall. Wondering why no one was watching. That's not what happened. It's what I see. Thomas felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just about preventing future accidents. This was about retroactively saving someone who was already gone, about somehow undoing a trauma that Alistair's mind refused to process. He drowned in the storm, Thomas said gently. Not because you weren't watching. He drowned because the sea is powerful and humans are fragile. That's all. No deeper meaning. No cosmic punishment for inattention. Just a terrible accident. If I'd been watching closer, you'd still be torturing yourself with what-ifs. That's what guilt does. It creates infinite alternate scenarios where you somehow save the day. But those scenarios aren't real. What's real is that you did your job. You did everything you were trained to do. And sometimes that's not enough. And that's okay. That's being human. Alistair finally looked away from the monitor. His eyes met Thomas's, and for just a moment, Thomas saw the man beneath the obsession. Scared, exhausted, desperate for permission to stop carrying this impossible weight. I don't know how to stop, Alistair whispered. You just stop, 1 second at a time. You look away from that screen. You close your eyes. You let someone else handle the watch. And if something happens while I'm not watching, then it happens. And it's not your fault. Just like it wasn't your fault 4 years ago. Alistair's hands were shaking. He looked back at the monitor, then away, then back again. The pull was almost physical, a compulsion so strong it might as well have been gravity. I can't, he said finally. I'm sorry, Thomas. I know what you're trying to do. I know you're trying to help. But I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Thomas nodded slowly. He'd tried. They'd all tried. But some wounds run too deep for simple words to heal. The ship docked at 0800 the following morning. Alistair was escorted off by medical personnel, still insisting that someone needed to maintain watch on the vessel, even while in port. His last view of the ship was over his shoulder as they loaded him into an ambulance, his eyes still scanning the deck, still searching for gaps, still convinced that his vigilance was the only thing standing between order and chaos. 3 weeks later, the ship prepared for its next deployment. A new watchman had been assigned to the night shift, a quiet sailor named Marcus Holt. He was reliable, punctual, professional. Everything you'd want in a watchman. On his third night of watch, something strange happened. His relief arrived on time, performed the standard handoff, and Marcus was officially off duty. He should have gone below deck, gotten some food, rested. But he didn't. He stood there, just a few feet from his post, his eyes on the water. When asked if he was all right, he said he was fine. He just wanted to make sure everything was secure before he left. An hour passed. Marcus was still there, standing in the shadows just beyond the main watch area. Not interfering, not taking over, just watching. You can go rest, his replacement said. I've got it from here. I know, Marcus replied. Just a few more minutes. Those few minutes stretched into an hour. Then, too, by the end of the week, Marcus had stopped sleeping in his rack. He would lie down, close his eyes, but never actually sleep. Just rest. Just brief moments of stillness before the pull brought him back to the deck, back to the railing, back to watching the water that never stopped moving, never stopped waiting. Thomas Keir saw it happening and felt ice form in his stomach. He'd seen this before. He knew how it ended. He reported it to Captain Moore, who sighed heavily and made a note in his log. They'd transfer Marcus out at the next port, get him help before it went too far. But the night before they reached port, Thomas couldn't sleep. He went up to the deck and found Marcus there, standing at the exact spot where Alistair used to stand. Same posture, same fixed stare, same mechanical scanning pattern. "Marcus," Thomas said carefully, "how long have you been up here?" Marcus didn't look away from the water. "I don't know. Time is difficult to track." And Thomas realized with creeping horror that it wasn't just Alistair. It wasn't an individual failing or a personal trauma. It was something about the watch itself. Something about the act of standing guard over an indifferent sea, night after night, knowing that your attention is the only thing between a crew and the void. Some men could do it and walk away clean, but others got caught in it. The watch became more than duty. It became identity. It became prison. And once caught, there was no escape. Only an endless vigil, an unending watch, standing guard against a danger that might not even exist, unable to stop for fear of what might happen in the gaps. Thomas stood there beside Marcus for a long time, neither of them speaking. The sea stretched out before them, black and infinite, and utterly unconcerned with human efforts to contain its chaos. Somewhere in a medical facility on shore, Alistair Rowe was probably standing at a window, still watching, still counting, still convinced that his attention mattered. And maybe in some terrible way, he was right.